The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. Hope you all had a good week and are enjoying the long-awaited sunshine. Amazon made a positive statement this week about cannabis, which I'm sure you've all read. Firstly, they are no longer going to disqualify workers for cannabis use, which is a great step. But secondly, and with wider implications, they are now actively supporting the MORE Act, which, if passed, should lead to federal legalization in the US. So obviously that's big news. Amazon being Amazon, obviously not doing it just out of the kindness of their hearts. Undoubtedly, cannabis is another industry that they wish to dominate. However, they do carry huge clout, so it's definitely a positive step for the reform camp to have such a big player pushing this agenda. So at least when we're all living on planet Amazon soon, we'll all be allowed some weed. I've been thinking a couple of things over, and I thought this is a good place to voice some areas that I was a bit confused by. One of the things that I've been thinking about recently is around gummies. And I'm genuinely interested to understand why gummies are the predominant form of cannabis edible, or at least it appears that way to me here in the UK. It strikes me a bit strange to have something that's intoxicating in a form that we generally associate with kids. I mean, firstly, there's the obvious risks of kids accidentally eating a cannabis edible. But secondly, it kind of feels to me that it sort of undermines efforts to make cannabis more credible and responsible. You know, with the obvious risks, particularly around children, I think it gives prohibitionists really easy ammunition to attack and discredit cannabis. So my question is, are there better ways to make this an adult product? And if so, what are they? I'll be putting out a LinkedIn post in a couple of days with this similar question. So please pitch in if you have an answer. Genuinely interested to hear what people's thoughts are on this subject. But anyway, back to the show. It's a good one. I'm very excited about it. It's with Leafly. Enjoy. On today's show, we have Yoko Miyashita. Yoko is CEO of Leafly. For the few of you that haven't heard of Leafly, it's the world's largest cannabis information resource and tech company. Yoko, welcome. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Real pleasure. Where in the world are you today?
I am based in Seattle, where I've been for the last 15 months and have not moved.
Yeah, I get that. Brilliant. Cool, thank you. So yeah, look, we've got loads to talk about. I mean, Leafly is like maybe one of the coolest brands in this space, so loads of stuff to get into. But would you mind introducing yourself? Tell us a bit about your background and how you came to be in the wonderful world of cannabis.
Yeah, so I'm Yoko. I'm based in Seattle, born in Japan, raised in the States. That's a little bit about me personally. I came to Leafly after a long career in legal practice, most recently with Getty Images, the largest image marketplace. And I spent 14 years with Getty as their general counsel for the last 3.5 to 5 years. So I joined Leafly in May of 2019, after a long, fantastic time at Getty. I was looking for the next challenge, and being based in Washington State, I knew in my heart of hearts it would need to be in cannabis. Just watching this new industry grow from scratch here, and that experience of walking into your first rec store and not knowing actually what to expect from that experience and just being completely floored and taken away, I just knew I had to be in this space. So for me, Leafly bringing together media and cannabis in my backyard was just the experience of all experiences, and they were hiring for a general counsel. So it was one of those sort of kismet moments of, this is my next job. I just know it in my heart of hearts. And that was almost 2 years ago to the day. And, I took on this role of CEO in late summer of last year. So I've been in the seat for about, lost track of time, 8 months almost. And, fall in love with this industry over and over every day.
Friends, I mean, there's so many things there. As a lawyer, it's brilliant to hear these sort of stories. How do you feel about the transition from being the company lawyer to the kind of leader. It's quite a different discipline.
It is a different discipline, and maybe you might have had this experience as well, coming from the legal side. But one of the roles that a role like a general counsel allows you to play within an organization is seeing every aspect of how the organization comes together. And you're actually, without really being in the middle of it, you are intentionally being in the middle of it. You have to have eyes on every aspect of the business. So you actually start with a foundation rooted in what's happening in every corner of your business if you're doing your job well. You then take a regulated industry like cannabis, and I'll use the parallel from my prior career. My prior career was images, intellectual property, where the product and opportunity itself is rooted in the regulatory or legal structure. And that necessarily makes your role as a legal professional part of defining strategy for an organization going forward. So it's actually, I don't know if there are a lot of parallels. I don't know if that would be the case in all industries, but I did feel that in the case of cannabis, and given that this was a information media rich organization, there are a couple of things that made me just feel like this is one of those that you really jump at when the opportunity arises.
Yeah, absolutely. And I draw a lot of parallels to that. And in that my experiences when I was in-house counsel was I had to deal with so many different departments that I sort of got to understand the idiosyncrasies of the marketing team versus the tech team and the finance guys and the HR guys. They all have a different way of approaching things.
Well, and I think you probably remember this from that experience of you're often the connective tissue. Left hand often doesn't know what's going on with the right hand. So as someone who's responsible for serving and working with everyone, you're doing a lot of that. Hey, did you know this is what's going on over here? And helping them connect. So I look at sort of what I'm doing now in the CEO role as sort of a larger meta version of that, of just continuing to drive connective tissue within our organization. And, for me, I couldn't do this without a highly, highly capable and talented senior leadership team. Right? You are surrounded by the subject matter experts, and my job is then to bring us together and conduct us.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, great that you kind of had the vision to go for the role, and great that your board recognizes the background and how valuable that is to a CEO role. So, it makes me feel good that lawyers are kind of rising to this kind of lofty place.
You see it across the industry.
Yeah.
There are a ton of GCs taking on the CEO roles in cannabis companies. Yeah. I think I feel like we're having our day now. We're having our moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Hope that stuff start happening in Europe as well, maybe. Yeah, in terms of also, from a career perspective, I mean, Getty is a very well-established business. How do you go from something like that to a very edgy, kind of new and in some circles controversial area? That must be a bit of a difference too. And did you think about any stigma or anything like that when you were approaching it?
Yes, but for me, that's the opportunity. There's obviously sort of the scale, right? Size and scale of moving from a multinational. We were in 22 countries with over 1,800 employees. The legal team itself was a third of the size of Leafly when I joined. But for, that was a very, at a particular stage in my career where I actually wanted to do it and start again and really try something on. So that's one aspect of it. But I look at sort of this opportunity in cannabis to lead here and the destigmatization that we're about to, we're lawyers. We deal with logic and reason and data. And this is our opportunity to actually re-educate the world about the potential of this plant to make a huge difference. It has been shrouded in stigma because of almost 100 years of prohibition that was just based on faulty policy. So our job is to surface the facts. Our job is to surface the data and start changing minds. That's really exciting. And, what drives this organization. We are giving people the information they need, the data they need to make informed decisions about cannabis.
Yeah, absolutely. Education is is a close passion of mine and a kind of real core driver for the podcast. So I love everything you guys are doing. And so maybe, it's a good segue into telling us a bit more about Leafly and for the 3 people out there that don't know about it. Yeah, to tell us a bit more from your perspective.
Well, you gave us a great intro. We're the leading resource and marketplace for cannabis. We're helping over 100 million annual visitors learn more about strains, consumption methods, legalization, and how to shop for legal cannabis nearest them. Like, there are so many things that I think we take for granted as regular sort of consumers that don't translate into cannabis yet. Like, I think about how difficult this space is. Thousands of strains, multiple form factors, and an endocannabinoid system, which means we can each have a different response to the multi-variable combinations of strains, form factors, and endocannabinoid system. And then we say, okay, you have to understand that this is what's happening. And then we have to help you find legal cannabis near you. Each state, and I'm going to take a very North American perspective here, each state and province in the US and Canada has a very different approach around what is or is not permitted on how you can shop for legal cannabis. Can you imagine like anything else that you shop for in your daily life where you're like, oh, I have to understand how can I shop for this product? All of the things that we take for granted as regular consumers, we are trying to demystify and give consumers a direct path to help answer and solve all of those questions, to connect them with the right cannabis product for their needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that kind of, it's not dissimilar to sort of European kind of landscape as well, because each nation within within Europe is sort of taking a slightly different approach. The lack of harmonization makes sort of cross-border trade quite difficult at the moment, I think. And same within the US, right?
Right. And we have not even scratched the surface of that issue, right? I'm super optimistic about that. That's where we will get to with federal legalization. But what a bunch of sticky questions that we have to look forward to.
Yeah. And there's another big C word on the agenda at the moment, obviously COVID. How's that treated you guys as a kind of online business?
COVID has been so devastating for so many individuals and so many businesses, and I feel like cannabis has been the bright spot in that. Let's start with the stigma piece. That recognition across governments that cannabis is an essential business. It's finally that acknowledgement of what the role that cannabis plays in people's lives, right? This is a recreational product, but for many, this is a medical necessity. So you take that piece, and then we were in this position of having to solve, all right, it's essential. We recognize that this is medication for some folks. How do we actually get it into people's hands in this moment where we're trying to reduce contact? And I think this was an amazing moment and acceleration of realizing and regulators coming together with industry saying, how do we make sure we can get cannabis into the hands of consumers? All right. How do we allow for pickup? How do we allow for curbside? How do we loosen our regulations to allow for delivery? Because the most important thing is to get cannabis into the hands of people who need it. So it's been, I would say, amidst the devastation of COVID, it has been a moment for cannabis. And I think a recognition across the board that, and one of the bright spots in what has been a difficult economic situation for so many states and provinces. Absolutely.
Yeah. Definitely. We've talked about it a few times on the show, and the States is obviously a bit further ahead than we are in Europe in a slightly different direction as well. But yeah, it sounds like things have kind of really gone well for cannabis, if you like, during a really, really challenging time.
It's got to be some bright spots.
Yeah, there has to be. So, I mean, maybe would you mind telling us a bit more about what are the main revenue streams for Leafly, and how do you kind of engage with customers and people and audience?
Yeah. So, as a multi-sided marketplace, Leafly built its name through all of this. The consumers come to Leafly because we provided them with the information they need. We were here leading the destigmatization charge and just educating. And it turns out when you can bring together this whole community of consumers, retailers and brands want to get in front of them. So our primary business model is listing space where licensed retail stores and brands in a particular state or province list with Leafly. And what I would say has been the real game changer for us is over the last 3 years, we introduced our e-commerce tools that now allow for consumers to place orders with retailers. And I don't know if this is known to you or obvious. At the risk of stating the obvious, it's because of regulations and because of federal prohibition, you can't have online payments. So you still need to go into a store and make a payment, or in jurisdictions where delivery is allowed, the delivery service provider needs to bring you your cannabis and you pay in person. But for us, this ability to say, I've got a consumer, I've been able to match them to the right product at the store nearest them and to drive that customer into the door of a retailer, that's a hugely powerful and accretive transaction, both for consumers as well as retailers.
Fantastic. Have you had to pivot at all? I mean, you've only been in that role for 8 months or so, but I always ask this about businesses.
I would not call it a pivot. I would call it a transformation of we had gone through, we had downsizing, which was a terrible thing to have to do just as COVID hit. But what that did force us to do was focus and pick our path. We were dabbling in a lot of different things, sort of mid 2020s, and sort of this change and having fewer employees meant we were going to make one bet, and our bet was on ordering, and that has paid off for us.
Fantastic. That's great. And are you looking at Europe at all? It's obviously quite different, and you're not able to do a lot of the things that you do.
We are absolutely, we've got our eyes on all of the markets right now in terms of how quickly we get there. I'm just going to let you in a little secret. Europe is already on Leafly. They've been coming to Leafly for years. Yeah. We love our constituency in the UK. We've got a ton of readers who are regular visitors, and we're grateful for that audience. And, that's what we'll just continue to do, right? Is to make sure all of that recent information and research is available for consumers around the world. And that's how we build a market, right? We build that consumer interest in cannabis. We serve that need, and then we can go from there in terms of expansion.
Yeah. Fantastic. Cool. Well, thank you for all the background, and it was great to sort of understand a bit about you and the business too. So you guys put together recently a cannabis jobs report, and so I thought it might be useful. Maybe we can go through some of the findings and what you kind of found in that piece of research.
So this is something we started in 2017, and we did this because in the U.S. the federal government does not track cannabis jobs. So I just want to put that out there of if we don't do this, these jobs aren't counted. There are 321,000 full-time jobs in the U.S. in the cannabis industry as of last count. Wow. And this is in 37 states with legal and medical markets. And these are just legal jobs. That's 77,000 more jobs than we counted in 2019. 32% increase year over year. It's one of the fastest growing industries in this country.
It's huge.
And it's huge. And, just to give you a size and scale, that's 321,000 jobs serving $18 billion of spend in the legal cannabis space in the U.S.
Wow.
And we are at the tip of the iceberg. I cannot, if you've been tracking what's happening in the legalization side, New York last week announced. Virginia has announced for 2024 to launch. They've now sped up their timeline. That'll be a possession. They're accelerating the possession as well as home grow. But just think about even allowing for home grow and what sort of ancillary businesses that stimulates in the grow and, home gardening sector. This is just massive in terms of what we are driving and creating in this industry. We now have more jobs in cannabis than we have police officers in the state of Michigan. We have more jobs in cannabis than we have electrical engineers. We now are double the number of dentists across this country. This is it. We are here. This industry is here to stay.
Yeah, fantastic. And were there any kind of surprising findings that you saw in the report?
It's just the rapid acceleration, and we are, and let's put this in context. This is 2020 when everyone was actually, I don't think we've seen the full potential and growth because of the COVID constraints, right? Think about how many retail stores had constrained shopper limits, right? Which meant you were probably staffing at a lower rate. If you were switching to curbside, you were just going to have some, even in the retail space, you were going to have some natural reductions in the number of people you were employing. So I actually think these numbers are artificially constrained when you think about when we're back to a post-COVID economy, what this will look like.
Yeah. It's so weird. It's hard to predict what the real world is like now, isn't it? Because of this bizarre year or so we've had. Are there any particular subsectors or particular roles? I mean, bartenders are obviously would be a big area in the States when you're allowed to have an open retail store, but were there any other areas that sort of...
Yeah, and we don't go specifically in our report as a role by role, but right. I love the question because what it does is it surfaces, like, think about the grow side of this, right? Like the grow side, the processing side, the distribution side, the retail side. If you think about us, the ancillary services tech side of this, like this is just a massive band of opportunity and generating tax revenues. And the other thing about our regulatory structures, these are jobs, these are industries in each of these states. And because they're state regulated markets, the jobs are created in a particular state, which I think is why it's such a powerful opportunity for states to look at coming out of this COVID experience saying, look, taxes are down. People have lost their jobs. What is my growth engine? And I think, look, 68% of Americans support legalization. When you have that kind of political support and you have something so obvious in front of you, I think it becomes really hard for state legislatures to say, oh, I don't know about this cannabis thing.
Well, we do that in the UK, so. I mean, I think it's a bit stronger in the US, and you have much better headwinds because basically the states are saying we're going to do it anyway, which is brilliant.
It's, like, look at our fall, this momentum really picked up. If you look at sort of the fall election cycle here, right? Why it was so big was that you had 3 red states going all, South Dakota who said, I'm not waiting for med or rec. I'm doing it all at once, right? Montana saying, yeah, rec all the way. Mississippi saying, we're going to have a deep, we are going to have a true med program. Like, this is not a blue or red political issue. There is broad-based support for this because we recognize these have been failed policies of prohibition and we're missing out on significant economic opportunity.
Yeah. And you've got places like Oregon as well, who are expanding it wider than just cannabis, I think, as well.
Oh, yeah. Right? Like the psychedelics piece in terms of... Yeah. And, this is where I would love to hear your perspective of the criminal justice failures, the social justice failures of prohibition and treating, whether it's cannabis, whether it's psychedelics, whether it's other drugs, as criminal behavior and locking people up for it. I think we're having a reckoning of, is this really the right way to take care of our people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it should be a public health issue and not a criminal issue. And yeah, it's such a shame that it has been. I mean, we have similar issues in the UK, but not to the extent that you guys do, I think. But still, it's a thing that's affecting us all, and we're hopeful for reform. In fact, just the other day, the Mayor of London said that he wanted to open up the discussion to consider decriminalisation, which was fantastic. And then the Prime Minister very quickly squashed that and said cannabis is a harmful substance. So when you got that level of ignorance at the government level, and I know Biden as well, despite the kind of good noise around him, he's still quite skeptical, I think. So it's not clear cut, is it?
That's why you need education.
Yeah.
That's what we're here for, right? And
yeah,
the other issue and the other point that our jobs, like, let me lay this one out and sort of put the building blocks on this one. This is a social justice issue. This is a criminal justice issue because prohibition has had a disproportionate impact on communities of color. There is no denying that. I think I think that you share those same statistics that we do. And when you look at incarceration rates and the predicates for arrests that cannabis has proved, like legalization and social justice just go hand in hand. And you see that then manifest in how these industries are developing and how regulations are being implemented stateside of saying, hey, we've got to tackle social equity. We've got to actually use legalization as a moment to right the wrongs of failed prohibition. Yeah. And, one thing we've added to our jobs report is actually reporting then on how are communities of color doing? Are they participating at the rate we would want to see them participate in? And we're not there yet.
Yeah.
Right? Black communities, Black Americans, 13% of the U.S. population represent less than 2% of cannabis ownership. Mm-hmm. Something's not working here.
Yeah.
And we have an opportunity to do it differently, which I get super excited about.
Yeah, no, it is. And it's, it was a prominent feature of the New York announcement the other day, I think, and which was fantastic to just see that it is kind of, front and center That's a very important issue.
100%. Yeah. And, in New York, it's why the bill stalled last year. And I am just so of the mind that where there's a will, there's a way. And this is our opportunity in a way that you don't have in any other industry, because we are building this from the ground up.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like tangent, but, on the diversity perspective, and I wanted to ask your personal opinion. I mean, we talked about briefly before the show, in Asian female CEOs, sadly, is that there are a huge amount. So how are you finding that? And in general, because I mean, I think you said before the show, actually, you're meeting lots more female CEOs in this industry than in other industries. But how are you finding that all generally?
It's a funny one. It's not something that I reflect on a lot, but I do also reflect on the fact that sometimes I'll be in a room and go, yeah, nope. One of these things is not like the other.
Yeah.
I think, though, it might also tie to, we talked about stigma. We talked about something new. We talked about something that doesn't have that mass acceptance yet. And for me, that's just opportunity. Like, for me, I was just so excited about being in this space. Like, okay, if others are sitting it out, waiting to see how this whole cannabis thing develops, and I'm super excited about this, great. If this is the space and this is sort of that risk profile that allows me to elevate, great. I'm taking advantage of whatever is put in front of me in terms of opportunity. And then it's my role then to say, I'm blasting open that door behind me. So I'm not the only one in that room, right? Like, who else do we bring along as part of this?
Yeah, brilliant. I love that. Very inspiring as well. And to sort of round it off, I think, if you think about jobs and, how we kind of drawing more talent into this industry as it grows and gets higher profile, I think there's probably people that are a bit skeptical about it because of legacy stigma issues. Clearly, education and information is very central to that. So, how do you see Leafly's role in kind of helping that?
I think when you can see, I break it by, and you might think like this, well, we break it down to its component parts, right? Like, down to the point of where we're even developing a basic curriculum around this. Let's understand the history of cannabis. Let's understand the historical role it's played in communities for thousands of years, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you need to understand that we didn't always prohibit cannabis. All right, let's talk about when Prohibition came in and what was the political context of that. Too many immigrants coming from across the border in the U.S. who used cannabis. Oh, let's give it a very, ethnic sounding name, marijuana, and then prohibit it. And then let's use this to target communities of color through incarceration and failed criminal justice. Like, when you can actually start breaking down the pieces that have led us to where we are. Oh, and because of federal prohibition, we actually haven't been able to study this, because in the U.S., if you want to study cannabis, it has to be grown in one facility in one state university in the state of Mississippi to be used in federal research.
And apparently they grow really bad weed as well.
Grow bad weed. And so when you can start to say, why isn't there any data? Why isn't there any science? Because we actually haven't allowed that to happen. And when you can just debunk every step of this and build that knowledge, yeah, that takes work. But like, for me, this is a no-brainer. The other thing is, like, we are going to call out, like, Leafly's role here is to call out the good and the bad behavior. You're gonna have people who are skirting this system or not playing this properly, or you are going to have science and studies that tell you this is okay, that's not okay. We're here to surface all of that. But let's do it on the basis of facts. Let's do it on the basis of understanding a political context and policy initiatives, and let's go from there. And I have been so amazed of the people I meet in this industry and the level of creativity of people who have joined. Like, they're definitely the people who have come. The people who are drawn here are drawn because they see all of that and they can debunk all of that and just say, oh, okay, they can make that shift of, we come out with this perception of cannabis because all of these things happened before it. All right, how do we change our mind? How do we change the minds of others?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I really liked about what you just said there is that the notion of balance in, the good and the bad. And, I often witness arguments on LinkedIn where, you've got very passionate supporters of cannabis that almost, are not allowed to criticize it in any way. And I'm not sure if that's always very helpful, although passionate, I can appreciate that. So it's good to, acknowledge the difficult bits around it as well.
Cannabis is not for everyone.
Totally.
We want to help you figure out if it's right for you and how can we help you consume safely and responsibly. I've got teenage kids. I have no interest in my 13 and 16-year-old experimenting with cannabis right now. We have that talk. Hey, this may be right for you, but not right now based on where your brain development is. Let me walk you through this.
Yeah.
But so I don't understand why it has to be we can be balanced. Let's give people the right information. Let's allow ourselves to actually have nuance in how we make our decisions.
There's just polarity in society in general, isn't there? So it's if anything that we can do to kind of bring it to a bit more nuance and balance, I think is great. Cool. Well, thank you, Yoko. This has been so really brilliant and interesting. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of Leafly, so I'm really glad that we finally made this happen. We'd love to get you back on at some point as well. So
we'd love to join.
Brilliant.
Absolutely. Let's work on what we can do in the UK.
100%. Love to.
Decriminalization in London.
For sure. Cool.
Let's get your first market up and running.
Let's do it. Thanks, Yoko.
Thanks again.